No man is ever whipped until he quits in his own mind.
The way out is through. So you can sit here in the parking lot and be like, woe is me, this is stressful. Or you can just keep moving forward and eventually it'll all, be worth it.
Hello, welcome to this episode, whatever this thing is called, this episode of the Business Brains and BS podcast. Today, we are talking about a quote that comes from a fantastic book. It's a book by Napoleon Hill called Think and Grow Rich. And the quote that kind of spawned or spurred this episode is, "No man is ever whipped until he quits in his own mind." So Greg was reading Think and Grow Rich, obviously. I've already read it as well, but he's the one who had the idea here. So Greg, what was it about this quote that made you think, hey, you know what, this would be a great topic for the podcast?
Yeah, like you said, I think this is a book that just about every business owner has probably read at some point in their life. And that particular quote popped up recently, and I was thinking about it. I was like, man, that quote does really resonate with me, and I think probably a lot of business owners, because there are a lot of ups and downs, in business. And I'll just speak for myself. I've had times where I'm like, this is the greatest thing I've ever done. I've had times where I've thought, what a foolish mistake I have made. What was I thinking? And everything in between. And it seems to me, and you would probably know better than I would, but it seems to me a huge piece of success in business is just perseverance, sticking it out. I remember when I first started out, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard someone say that I think it was like 50% of all small business fail in the first year, and then like of the ones that survive, 50% of those go out of business in the first 5 years. I think was those the numbers I heard.
Yeah, I think it's like 10% or left after 5 years, like 10%.
Yeah, so I remember thinking like, getting through the first year and being like, okay, I beat half the field. And then you getting through 5 years and being like, okay, so I guess this is significant that we made it this long. And I could tell a difference in my business after 5 years, for sure. Um, but yeah, it's like sometimes that is just a state of mind. I mean, obviously there are concrete things you have to have money to pay bills, but it's also just like being willing to push through when things suck is a big part of it, and convincing yourself that you're not completely whipped, like I said in the in the quote.
Well, and I think that whipped part of it, I think a big part of it goes to action, right? Because when we're feeling whipped, and I'm speaking for myself here, I don't know about everybody else, but when I'm feeling whipped, a lot of times I tend to focus on what's not going well, and that kind of pulls me into, maybe for lack of a better term, a darker place, a place, really, I would say more a place of isolation, right? I don't necessarily go and talk to people and get help. And it's kind of funny. I can't believe I'm going to tell this story. I'll be a little bit vulnerable here, but several years ago, I was really struggling with my business, and I own a franchise called Action Coach, and I reached out. I had really just kind of pulled away from the community, and I reached out to the master licensee who's over my territory and said, I don't think I can do this. This is not working. And she and I had a really good conversation, and she uh, put a bunch of different resources out there for me to help me, kind of turn the corner and get things going again. And I think two things I really learned from that experience. Number one is it's really easy to be lonely as a business owner, and it's really easy to let yourself kind of pull back, from a community, because I think it goes to um, that idea of keeping up with the Joneses and trying to look successful. And there's um what's the word I'm looking for here, a certain level of success that you want to convey, right? You want people to think, because you don't want people to know you're like just like them, and things may not be going well for you and your business, right? So I learned that having a community, having a good support system with you, in addition to your family, is a really big and important part of being successful in business and not being whipped. And I think the other thing goes back to taking action, right? Because when you end up in that dark, lonely space, it's really easy just to fall into that, "Oh, woe is me," pity, "My life sucks. It's all over. What have I done? I'm a failure," type of thing, right? And I've found with myself and with clients that when you start focusing, that's an opportunity for you to start focusing on what's really important and taking action. And when you start to take that action, it's amazing how the energy changes, the mindset changes. And yeah, you may bounce off of a wall or two here, but just the fact that you know inside of you that you are doing something to change the situation starts to give you fire and fuel, right? And it kind of takes that whipped out of your mind and replaces it with, here's opportunity, here's where I can go, right? And I think that's one of the big things about Think and Grow Rich is having a clear purpose and then being focused on it, right? We talk about, and maybe you could talk a little bit about this, setting the reticular activating system in your brain for what you want. So I imagine a lot of people listening don't know what the RAS is. So could you maybe talk a little bit about that and how that?
Yeah, so you're talking about the idea that basically when something's on your mind, you see it more. Like a good example is like, let's say there's a particular car that you're interested in, like a, I don't know, a blue Volvo, and you really like that car and you think, oh, I'm gonna buy one of those. And at that moment, you've never seen anyone else drive a blue Volvo. And once you start thinking, I want that particular car, every day you see a blue Volvo on the road and you're like, what is the deal? The actual number of blue Volvos out there didn't change. It's just on your mind, so you're seeing it more. Um, that's really common. Once something's in our mind, it starts popping up other places. Um, that's what you're referring to there, that reticular activating system. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does that work for us then when we start to look at our goals, right? Because this is really, a lot of what that book Think and Grow Rich is about is kind of a singularity of purpose and a focus and taking action and moving toward those goals. So when I set my mind on a goal, a revenue goal, let's say, or a new clients per month goal or whatever it is, how does the reticular activating system help me make that happen?
Hopefully, if you're doing it in a positive way, you start to see opportunities. You were talking about taking action, the importance of that, and when you said that, I thought, yeah, that's absolutely right. Because I can remember times when uh, the business was not doing as well financially, and I'm stressing about money, but just sitting down, looking at all the accounts, looking at the profit loss or whatever, and just seeing everything laid out with the idea that I needed to come up with a way to make this better. Just that, I felt better. Um, Even though nothing had changed, circumstances aren't any better. I just have a clear picture of it, and I could put together like a goal based on these metrics, And then so to your question you just asked, once I set that goal, if that's what's in my mind, I start seeing the opportunities to pursue that goal. Whereas before I sat down and did that, it just all seemed like doom and gloom, maybe. And so it's just in my mind of like, oh, where are we going to get the people? How are we going to do this? And, something clicks and it's like, okay, like a referral source, for instance, like this particular type of referral source works well. So I can get it from point A to point B if I just do this. And then all of a sudden I start seeing those types of opportunities pop up more and more, or a particular type of client, I'll be like, hey, we see a lot of these people. Where do I find those people? And then it becomes a lot easier to find good prospective clients, and yeah, so I think it's like once that's kind of that wire's been tripped or however you want to put it in our mind, it's nothing changes in the real world circumstantially. It's just what we see is different. We see opportunities that we didn't see before.
Yeah, it's that same number of blue Volvos. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think that it's interesting because I think, we get what we expect. It's kind of that self-fulfilling prophecy. I talk to business owners all the time who say there's nobody good out there to hire. You can't find anybody who wants to work. And then I go to other businesses where they've got amazing employees who are doing fantastic things, and I think, well, wait a minute, you're attracting what you're putting out there, right? And it becomes that self fulfilling prophecy. And I think it's the same thing with employees. I think it's the same thing with performance. Um, and it goes back to that clarity of purpose, right? It goes back to what is it exactly that I want, and then going out and taking that action and working. And I'm not going to get this story 100% right, so I apologize to everybody in advance. But in Think and Grow Rich, they tell the story of a guy who was prospecting for gold, and he borrowed a bunch of money to buy this machinery so that he could try to find this vein of gold, and borrowed this money, went out there with these high hopes, and drilled and drilled and drilled and dug and dug and dug, finally gave up and ended up selling the equipment to, I think the guy owned a pharmacy, if I'm not mistaken. Well, the guy who bought the equipment went and took the maps of the area to a geologist, and geologist was able to say, you know what, I think if you move the machine, I think it was like 3 feet over, you should find what you're looking for. And the pharmacist did exactly that and found one of the richest gold veins in history, right? So this guy gave up when he was really 3 feet away from success. But the cool part of that story, if I remember correctly, is he then went on to be, I think it was an insurance salesman, and he became very, very successful and very, very wealthy because he was able to take that failure that he had and say, you know what, I'm not going to let that define me. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to push forward, and I'm going to keep taking action. Right. I'm going to persevere. So while he may have let himself be whipped in that initial moment, he didn't let that define him and keep going.
Right, absolutely. That reminds me of something, a phrase that I learned from you that you've said to me multiple times to the point that now I say it to myself and others is imperfect action, which could be a whole podcast episode unto itself. But this idea of like just go do something, even if you don't have all the details and all the kinks worked out, like just go do something. That goes a long ways. Another quote that I think about when I think about this topic, it's a quote I tell myself sometimes, is like, the way out is through. And a few months ago, over the summer, we moved into a new office, bigger, more space, and at the same time added some extra people to the team to fill those offices. And I remember it was moving day. We were moving into the office, and from my perspective, like, it felt really stressful. I was, I'm spending all the money to get, moved into this place, and the actual work of getting moved in and dealing with all the different moving parts, all the different team members, the movers, the insurance, everything that you got to do. And I had a car full of stuff that I'd gotten from Lowe's or Target or whatever, making my like third trip to the office for the day to try to get it set up. And just feeling really stressed out and thinking like, man, I hope this was a good decision. And as I'm pulling into the parking lot, that quote came to my mind. I'm like, it doesn't matter. You already signed the lease. You already hired the people. Like, you got the car full of stuff. Like, you're in now. And that's that quote, the way out is through. Like, so you can sit here in the parking lot and be like, woe is me, this is stressful. Or you can just keep moving forward, and eventually it'll all, be worth it. But when you're a business owner, those moments I think come up, just over and over over time throughout the process. And so for me, that, like, yeah, the way out is through, or this Napoleon Hill quote, no man's ever whipped until he gives up in his own mind. Like, you just got to keep going, just keep taking action.
Yeah. Well, and you look at, I mean, how many success stories out there. It's funny because, you've heard the saying of I'm a 12-year overnight success, right? Because people see the success, but they don't see the work and the struggle that it takes. You look at Colonel Sanders, for example. I mean, I don't know. I can't wait till we get to a point with this podcast where we've got somebody we say, hey, go ahead and research that for us while we keep talking and pull that up, kind of like Joe Rogan has. But, but yeah, you look at a lot of the big success stories out there. In many cases, they ended up losing it all before they restarted. In many cases, they bounced off of 100 doors before someone said yes. Um, I heard the story actually at a conference this week about Stephen King, trying to get his books published, and he would send them and turn down, turn down, turn down, turn down, to a point that he ended up going and teaching. He became a teacher, right? And he um, continued writing, but it was one of those things where it was a major blow. He had planned on, being an author for a living, and one day he's just at school, and they get a call over the he gets a call over the PA system to come to the office. And as he's walking down the hall, he sees his wife standing there, and most people, if you get a call to come to the office and you see your spouse standing there, you're thinking, "Oh no, this is not good news. Something horrible has happened." Well, she had in her hand, she had the paperwork from a publisher for Carrie, so that was his big break, right? But it was the continuing to fight through it, finding a way, taking a job, because at one point he had to decide between buying medicine or food for his kids, and I think that was what spurned or spawned him, spurred him, whatever the right word is. Any English majors out there who want to comment on this and tell me what word I should have used there, feel free, put it in the comments. But that's what pushed him to take that job as a teacher, right? But he didn't give up on his dream. He found a way to work through it.
When do you know when it's time to pull the plug? Do you go on until you're bankrupt?
Well, and the other thing I was thinking is society and social media too, right? Because we kind of going off of this, when we think about success and overnight successes, we see more and more now only what people want us to see, right? With social media, it's like here's a picture of my feet at the beach. Here's a picture of the food that I just got at the restaurant. Here's the picture of the car that I just got with a bow on it, right? So it goes back, I think, to that mental image that we have of trying to keep up with the Joneses, which I know we've talked about before, but that failure and just you know, I heard a quote a while back, and it was, "Comparison is the thief of joy." And that really rings true for me because for so long, especially early on in my coaching career, I didn't feel like I knew what I needed to know. I didn't feel like I was doing everything I needed to be doing. I didn't feel like, I was as good as I needed to be. And then I would get on calls with other coaches, and they would talk about, this is a success I had with a client, or this is something that I'm doing for my business. And I would actually leave those calls demotivated, right? Feeling badly about myself because it's like, well, I can't do that, or I haven't done that. They're better than I am, right? And I think that's an example of me letting myself be whipped in my own mind. Then I was talking with a friend of mine who was also on those calls, and um, she said, "I look at it as inspirational. I look at it as if they can do it, then there's no reason I can't. I look at it as they just gave me some great ideas on how I can grow my business. Now I just have to figure out which one worked for me and move me forward." And it goes back to that filter that we put things through to say, okay, oh, woe is me. Does my life suck? I'm going to sit here and I'm just going to whine and complain. Or does it go through that filter and I say, okay, kind of go sticking with our gold story here, there are some golden nuggets here that I was just able to pan out of this. So instead of comparing myself to that other person and feeling badly, saying, thank you, universe, thank you, God, thank you, person, for the gold nugget you just gave me. Now, please help me figure out how to spend it, to turn it into 2, 3, 5, 12, 15.
Yeah, yeah. The perspective piece is huge, and I like that quote. Comparison is the thief of joy, and that relates to something we've talked about before. other episodes. Like what really matters is what matters to you, you know? Um, my personal opinion, I think in some degree, is starting a business is a selfish endeavor in the sense of like you're doing it to achieve your own personal goals. It's also an opportunity, or at least can be, to give to people, because you, whether it's giving to your customers, whether it's giving to your team, job opportunities and things like that. Um, but at the end of the day, I mean, we have our own kind of reasons for why we did this and we're pursuing it for. And your reasons aren't necessarily the same as the other people on those calls, you know? And so you shouldn't measure success, you know, by their measure of success. It needs to be by your measure of success. That's true for all of us.
Well, and I think, we have just in general, have a culture of look at me and look at the great things I did, right? Not many people are going to be that vulnerable and tell you the stories about how things didn't go well because of fear of perception, fear of being labeled a failure. Or, it may go back to that, that idea of imposter syndrome, whatever it might be. Um, but I've been going to a number of conferences here lately and talking to other coaches, and it's been really, really, amazing to me to hear the stories. Some of the most successful people in our company now are telling me stories about when they first started going through this and almost having their houses taken away from them. One of the guys told me a story about, his car being repossessed, so and then battling through that, going through it, and now ultimately getting to a point where they're some of the top performing coaches in action coach now, right? And it makes me think, maybe that's all part of the process, because if I learn the lesson here from the mistake, then when I'm making more, doing more, there's more at stake. I've learned the lesson so I don't repeat it here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to use the word failure. What I was thinking was like, failure is a part of the process. So when I say failure in that, I don't mean like ultimate to the point of giving up. Like that's, kind of where we started. But I mean failure in the sense of like it didn't go the way you thought it would go, or you hit some hard times. For sure. I mean, I know I've told you this before. When you and I met, I was at this place where there were multiple pay periods where, paydays. I'm running pay, and I'm like, I cannot afford to pay all the bills and pay this other therapist and myself. And so now I have to make a choice. And in those days, thankfully, I had the wherewithal to think big picture, long term, and say, okay, the move is I don't pay myself, because if I don't pay the other therapist, they're going to leave, and that's a problem. Um, and if I don't pay bills, then this whole thing closes up. So I don't pay. And then going back to like those expectations we put on ourselves and things, forget the neighbors. Going home and telling my wife, like, I don't think I can pay myself this week. Like, and thankfully, she never like, she didn't leave me over it or anything. But just as a person, that's embarrassing,
Yeah. Well, especially going to somebody who supported you like that, right? And said, I tried, and same thing happened with me, right? Going home to the person who, is one of the most important people to me in the world and saying, I feel like I've let us down. I feel like I've failed you. Yeah, that's tough to do.
Yeah. And you do learn things from those experiences. I just told someone recently, um, I mentioned before on here in my past life, I was a musician, and that was, one of those failures that taught me a ton. When I was a young man, I moved out to Los Angeles with ideals of becoming, a rich, famous musician. And instead I became, homeless instead. Went the exact opposite way of what I wanted. And, but that man, I'd learned so much from that experience. And I was the person I was talking to this week that was telling that, I was like, um, aside from like my family, like getting married and having a kid, I think that might be the best thing that ever happened to me, was having that experience. It completely reshaped my approach to life, and it even to my current business. There were lessons, when I look back on that, I'm like, "Why did that not work out?" Well, a huge problem I had is I did 0 networking. Even as a musician, you gotta network. And I remember talking to there was this a manager that I was trying to get to manage the band that I was in, and, he wasn't willing to commit to be our manager, but he was trying to help me out. Basically, we weren't far enough along that he was like, "Here are some things you can do." And one of the things he did that, looking back, was like he was really trying to do me a solid, was he would try to connect me to other bands, other musicians, like, "Hey, I work with these guys. You should go over here and hang out with them." I was so introverted and naive and everything that I was like, "Those guys kinda suck. I don't wanna go hang out with them." And that, so looking back, I'm like, "Man, that was dumb." You know? Um, and so in this business, I try to take lots of opportunities to go network, even if I'm not sure if it's gonna go anywhere. If someone else is like, "This person is a good connection, you should get with them," I'm at least gonna give it a chance. I'm at least gonna sit down and talk to them. Um, but that's just, one example of like what you were talking about, those, quote, failures, help us in the long term, help lead to successes in the long term. Those lessons are really important. Um,
Yeah. Well, and just thinking about the perspective that you have from that, right? It's like, okay, yeah, so I can't buy the new car right now, but at least I'm not living in the one I have right now. So being able being able to look at that and go, huh. And I think something else that you just brought up too, and this might be a great subject for a future podcast, is the concept of abundance versus scarcity, right? Because you kinda had a scarcity mindset of, "I don't wanna go hang out with those guys," versus that abundance mentality that the manager had of, "I am going to connect you with people who can help you learn and grow." And, when I meet somebody, when I meet a business owner and we start talking and they say, "I have a coach," the first thing I say is, "That's fantastic. Congratulations on doing something to help yourself and your business grow," right? Because I want to see every business do well. Because if every business does well, the economy does well, everybody's employed. We got, people are getting paid good wages, right? It's kind of the rising tide raises all buoys. And I think sometimes we come at things with this scarcity mindset of there's not enough out there for everyone else and me, and that's not true. I don't know if you've noticed the government keeps printing money, right? So this is not a political podcast, but I think it goes back to what we're talking about here, right? Is that there will always be opportunity out there if we don't, if we get out of our own way, if we don't let our brain tell us that the opportunity is dead.
and then, like we talked about, just keep taking action, just keep swinging, as they say.
All right. Well, that sounds like a great place for us to wrap things up today. So, thank you all for joining us on the Business Brains and BS podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, you need to go ahead and do yourself a favor, do us a favor. And I believe it's hit subscribe. I can never keep this all straight. Greg's nodding yes. So, hit subscribe for us and for yourself. And if you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify, go ahead, like, follow, share, give us a 5-star review if you would, and put some comments in there so that other folks out there can find us and we can bring them into the community. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.